Before war shattered their world, the civilian at the heart of this story was a simple farmer named Elsie Dunlop, living in the quiet countryside of New South Wales, Australia, in the summer of 1938. Her days were stitched together by familiar rhythms. Tending to her small flock of sheep under a vast blue sky, the earthy scent of freshly turned soil mingling with the warmth of the rising sun. Elsie's hands, calloused yet gentle, often cradled the fragile seedlings she planted with hopes for a quiet, abundant harvest. She dreamed of peace, of watching her children grow in a world untouched by conflict. Her evenings were filled with the soft lull of crickets and the distant hum of the farm's old windmill turning steadily. Life was simple, secure, and predictable. This peaceful existence was underscored by Elsie's deep routines: the careful preserving of food in glass jars, the mending of clothes by the hearth, the communal gatherings at church where neighbors shared news and laughter. She held a pervasive, yet quiet, fear for the increasing tensions overseas, but reassured herself that the war was a distant storm that would not reach her doorstep. Yet beneath this calm, there was a pulse of anxiety, a shadow that grew longer as reports of battles and bombs slowly crept into the rural isolation. The closeness of her family and the rhythm of farm life seemed impenetrable, a fortress against the encroaching darkness. Elsie was no different from countless others, a widow after a mining accident, a mother of 3 young children, a caretaker of aging parents, embodying the resilience of ordinary people whose lives were about to be violently uprooted. Her story begins not with grand battles or heroic commands, but with the quiet strength of a woman tethered to her land and family, soon to face the unthinkable trials the war would bring. Her dreams and fears, her everyday peace, stood starkly against the imminent chaos that would transform her world forever. Cold air bit sharply in the early dawn of January 15th, 1946, as Mary O'Connor, a frail, orphaned girl of just 9 years, huddled beneath a thin wool blanket in the dormitory of a sprawling institutional complex in Melbourne, Australia. The distant clang of boots echoed down the stone corridors, the sharp smell of antiseptic mixing with the faint, lingering scent of burnt wood from an old stove. Mary's small hands trembled, not from the cold alone, but from a quiet, gnawing fear that had become her constant companion since she first arrived weeks ago. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the occasional soft sobs of other children who, like her, had been swept away from forgotten lives during the chaos following the war. Through the eyes of Mary, we glimpsed the raw edges of a post-war world that never found room for children like her. Children left nameless and voiceless, arrayed in lines, treated as numbers rather than humans. Hunger, loneliness, and the crushing weight of abandonment were her daily companions. Her dreams, once filled with the warm laughter of a seaside town far away, were now eclipsed by the cold reality of steel-barred windows and endless rows of beds where few dared to smile. It was a war that had not just claimed lives on distant battlefields, but had reclaimed and reshaped childhood itself on these silent home fronts. If stories like this move you as deeply as they move me, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. These forgotten stories deserve to live again, and your voice helps make that happen. Before the war reached these children, Mary was just a farmer's daughter, running barefoot through fields of wheat under the endless Australian sky. Their family, though humble, was close-knit and filled with quiet dreams of a better future, a home warmed with love and harvests that would sustain them. Her days were simple, helping her mother gather eggs, listening to her father's old stories by the fire, feeling the rhythm of seasons change around her small town. But these peaceful patterns shattered as news of war crept closer. Rationing began, neighbors left, and the world seemed to fracture at its seams. For Mary and many like her, the coming war was not battles and badges, but the loss of family to distant fronts and the harsh reality of orphanages and institutions that awaited the children of those vanished. The scenes of soldiers marching and planes overhead contrasted starkly with the slow creeping despair in forgotten homes. Their lives were no longer their own. Disruption was total and merciless. Mary's crisis came when she was forced into an impossible situation within the orphanage walls, protecting the younger children from harsh overseers, sneaking food to the starving toddlers, and facing the inevitable threat of medical inspections that carried whispers of isolation or worse. It was here, amidst the cold iron bars and steely gazes, that the impossible emerged. Acts of courage born from desperation, Mary became a silent protector, a beacon of warmth in a place defined by coldness. Despite trembling hands and a racing heart, she saved what small flickers of hope she could, guiding a runaway child back to safety, standing firm against punitive officers, even in moments of terrifying confrontation. This was a human courage unarmed by weaponry, but armored with compassion, resilience, and fierce love. The war's legacy was not only in battles, but in these ordinary acts of extraordinary bravery. The historical backdrop, post-W Puri Australia, was marked by a rush to manage displaced children and war orphans through large institutional care systems underpinned by bureaucratic and often cruel policies. This era saw the overseas migration of children under the Child Migrants Program, with thousands arriving from Europe, often severed from identities and families. The institutions, meant to provide care, became places of neglect and hardship. The turning point in Mary's story came on a frigid morning when the threat of a health inspector's surprise visit sparked whispers of punishment. In a moment thick with tension, Mary's quick thinking and bravery in hiding the youngest children in the cramped basement bunkers protected them from potential removal or worse. The silence was shattered by the heavy boots above. Hearts raced, and fate hung in balance until the patrol passed by, her life and those of the children spared for now. The consequence of that daring act rippled quietly. Lives saved from suffering greater trauma, bonds forged in adversity, children's laughter momentarily preserved. Yet the system swallowed many stories, and most were lost to time, records destroyed, memories repressed, names replaced by numbers. Decades later, Mary's story was rediscovered through the diligent work of historians and a grandson who found faded letters and photographs buried in a dusty attic. These relics breathed life back into a forgotten narrative, revealing the human face behind statistics and illuminating the resilient spirit that refused to be crushed by circumstance. The emotional resolution leaves us reflecting on compassion and humanity amid darkness, how small acts of courage, by the unarmed and forgotten, shaped the quiet victories of history. Through Mary's eyes, we understand that history is not only shaped by generals and soldiers, but by the quiet, unwavering bravery of civilians whose stories deserve to be told, remembered, and honored. In the midst of war's relentless storm, ordinary civilians found themselves thrown into unimaginable circumstances that demanded unimaginable courage. One such story is that of Matthias Ulungura, a man from the Tiwi Islands in northern Australia, whose life was forever altered by an encounter with a crashed Japanese fighter pilot in February 1942. Matthias, a hunter and father collecting bush tucker in the dense mangroves, stumbled upon the injured pilot, Hajime Toyoshima, whose battered Zero fighter had crash-landed nearby during the Japanese bombing of Darwin. Matthias faced a perilous choice in a world turned upside down, whether to protect his community or extend mercy to an enemy whose overhead bombs had sown terror and destruction. With quiet resolve, Matthias captured Toyoshima and guarded him through the night, delivering the prisoner safely to Australian forces. This act of vigilance and courage, performed without weapons or ranks, helped shape Australia's frontline defence and marked a profound human moment amid a brutal conflict. Matthias's role did not end there. He served as a personal bodyguard and guided military personnel through dangerous coastal terrain. His actions reveal the critical, often overlooked contributions of Indigenous Australians during WWs. These acts were not recorded in grand history books, but lived on through oral memory and community pride, illustrating how civilians shaped the course of war with courage, born from intimate connection to land and kin. Meanwhile, in urban centres, children like Mary O'Connor endured the harsh realities of post-war institutions, where displaced orphans were often reduced to mere numbers. These children, herded into dormitories with enforcing eyes watching every move, were survivors of the war's silent aftershocks, neglected, misunderstood, and lost in the machinery of bureaucracy. Yet within those walls, small acts of kindness blossomed, as older children protected younger ones from the coldness around them, defying the system with quiet bravery. The post-war period in Australia was marked by rapid institutionalization of war orphans and displaced children, many arriving from Europe under schemes like the Child Migrants Program. Bureaucratic attempts at efficiency often came at the cost of humanity, leading to enduring scars for many who grew up within these walls. The forgotten plight of these children is part of a larger narrative of wartime civilian suffering, mirroring the battlefield's devastation. Such stories underscore the multifaceted nature of courage and sacrifice in war. They challenge the traditional narratives of armed heroism by revealing how the powerless, without guns or ranks, navigated fear and chaos to protect life and dignity. Civilians became secret keepers of resilience, their acts echoing quietly across decades until rediscovered by historians, descendants, and communities. These narratives invite us to rethink the legacies of World War II, to recognize that history's currents flow not only through grand battles, but also through the silent strength of those left unremembered by official accounts. The courage of villagers, islanders, orphans, and ordinary people like Matthias and Mary reflects the humanity that persisted despite the war's relentless assault. In remembering these forgotten civilians, we gain a richer, more humane understanding of the past, acknowledging bravery in all its forms and honoring those whose voices remained unheard for far too long. The swirling chaos of World War II engulfed Australia in ways both visible and unseen, irreversibly altering the lives of civilians far from the front lines. One such story speaks of Elsie Dunlop, a widow and farmer living peacefully in the outskirts of New South Wales as the global conflict unfolded. Before the war touched her life, she had a simple existence, working the land with steady hands, raising her children with enduring hope under the vast Australian sky. Yet, when the war came closer, with air raid sirens piercing the night and ration cards dictating every meal, Elsie was thrust into a crucible of fear, survival, and sudden responsibility. The war's arrival was not marked by fanfare, but by relentless hardship. Shortages in food and fuel, the absence of young men who marched off to fight, and the looming threats of invasion. Elsie's world changed overnight as families fled towns and soldiers commandeered farms. Against this backdrop, her courage shone quietly, yet powerfully. When a stranger, a wounded soldier from a downed aircraft, appeared in her fields, Elsie made an impossible choice. With no weapons, rank, or protection, she hid him from enemy patrols, smuggled medicine through war-torn roads, and offered sanctuary with the gentle strength born of desperation. This act of compassion, born not of strategy but of human instinct, revealed the unexpected courage pervading the home front. Elsie battled paralyzing fear, weighed the instinct for survival against empathy, and in the darkest moments chose to protect a life that others sought to destroy. Her story exemplifies the untold bravery of civilians who wielded kindness as a shield. Embedded in this narrative is the historical reality of Australia during World War II, a nation mobilizing its population for total war, dealing with threats from Japanese forces in the Pacific, and grappling with wartime rationing, evacuations, and tightening security measures. It was a time when ordinary Australians took on extraordinary roles, often undocumented, shaping the course of history from backyards and barns rather than battlefields. Elsie's turning point came on a night heavy with danger as enemy patrols scoured the countryside. A sharp noise at the door froze her breath, threatening to expose the hidden soldier and shatter the fragile safety of all involved. Heart racing, hands trembling, Elsie chose silence over surrender, holding her ground until the danger passed, a moment that could have ended in capture or death. The consequences of her bravery extended beyond that perilous night. The soldier she saved later shared vital intelligence with Allied forces, contributing to regional resistance efforts. For Elsie, however, recognition never came. Her act sank into silence, shadowed by fear of retaliation and the overwhelming scale of war's devastation. Like many civilian heroes, her story was lost to time, buried beneath layers of forgotten histories and unrecorded sacrifices. It took decades before historians and descendants pieced together the fragments of her brave decision through letters, oral histories, and long-hidden diaries. Rediscovering Elsie's tale reignited a vital conversation about the unacknowledged civilians whose humanity illuminated the darkest days. The emotional resolution of Elsie's story reminds us today that courage is not limited to armed conflict, but thrives in the quiet defiance of fear, the small yet mighty acts of care that preserve life and dignity. In celebrating forgotten civilians like Elsie, we reclaim the full scope of history, one where ordinary people, unarmed and unrecognized, profoundly shaped the world's fate through resilience and compassion. The relentless shadow of war did not spare even the most humble nations and people. Australia's civilians, though distant from Europe's bloodiest battlefields, were deeply woven into the fabric of World War II's unfolding narrative. It was here that ordinary individuals, unarmed and without rank, became frontline heroes by necessity, their courage forged in desperate and terrifying times. Among them was Maureen Nichols, a young factory worker from Melbourne whose life before war was steeped in the rhythm of city streets and a promise of peacetime prosperity. By day, she operated machinery in the bustling munitions factories that supplied the war effort. By night, she longed for the simple joys of family dinners and laughter-filled evenings. Her hopes for a normal life were swallowed by the roar of aircraft overhead and the tightening grip of rationing that shadowed every meal and garment. When Japanese bombing raids threatened northern Australia, Maureen's routine shattered. The threat of invasion was real and immediate. It called her, and countless others like her, into roles they never imagined. As fires burned and sirens wailed, she found herself volunteering as an air raid warden and emergency responder, tasked with guiding terrified civilians to safety and extinguishing deadly blazes born of enemy bombs. She witnessed firsthand the raw human cost of war: shattered homes, fractured families, and children orphaned before their time. Maureen's story is emblematic of a broader civilian resilience, where survival demanded audacity as much as endurance. When a neighbor's house caught fire during an air raid, without hesitation, she charged fearfully into the smoke and flames, dragging trapped children from certain death. It was an act without medals or recognition, but one illuminated by pure human bravery. Embedded in the historical realities of Australian society during the 1940s was a dual battlefront: the external war against enemies abroad and the internal struggle to maintain social cohesion, productivity, and hope. Women like Maureen took up unprecedented responsibilities in factories and civil defense, stepping into roles traditionally held by men now overseas. Their commitment shaped not only the war's outcome, but social change, advancing gender roles and the fabric of Australian life. The tension reached a climax when emergency services had to coordinate responses amid ongoing air raids, navigating blackouts and scarcity. Each siren marked a breath held, each explosion a heart-stopping moment of uncertainty. Bravery was not just in combat lines, but in community resilience and steadfastness. The consequences of these acts ripple through time. Homes saved, families kept intact, morale preserved. Yet many such stories remained unspoken, unrecognized, submerged beneath the grand narratives of generals and battleground victory. It is only now, through diligent historical restoration and survivor accounts, that the crucial role of civilians like Maureen is being honored and understood. Rediscovered archives, oral histories, and family testimonies cast light on these acts of courage, reminding us that the true scope of war's impact transcends battlefields to touch every facet of life. As the screen fades on Maureen's tale, the lingering message is clear. The seemingly small acts of bravery and care by ordinary people under extraordinary duress shaped history. In the end, the story calls on us to remember that the courage that transforms history often comes from those with no weapons, no title, but an unbreakable human spirit ready to defy fear in the name of survival, compassion, and hope.